Good morning. This is Amber Painter from the Indiana State Library, and I'm pleased to announce the start of the first session in our three-part series on managing compassion fatigue and burnout in the library. Today's session will be presented by Michelle Salyard. She is a professor of psychology from IUPUI, in addition to associate director of the Indiana ACT Institute. I'd just like to do a little bit of housekeeping and let you know that we are reserving questions till the end of the series. Please feel free to enter in your questions into the chat box as the session's going on, but we're going to try to hold off on answering the questions until the end of the presentation. Also, in addition, if you would like to attend Session 2 or Session 3, you will need to register for those each individually through our eVanced calendar. There were a few people who registered for this session but didn't register with their emails. So if you are one of them and you would like to have an LEU for attendance for this training, please email me directly with your contact information so I can send you an LEU. And now I'm going to turn it over to Michelle.
Great. Thank you, Amber. So I am delighted to be here today to talk about compassion fatigue and burnout and how we could start maybe doing some things to address those in the library. And this is part of a three-part series, and so I thought I would start a little bit giving you some background on how I came to this work and how I approach this work, and talk a little bit about defining burnout and compassion fatigue, how they're similar and different, and what burnout really looks like. And then I have some data to present on librarians in our state. I think many of you did the survey that Amber distributed a few weeks ago, so we have some preliminary data to share. And then we'll really get into some of the practices that can help prevent or reduce feelings of burnout, and today focusing on some of the more cornerstone contemplative strategies. And then our future webinars, the second webinar will focus more on some strategies around managing our workload and perceptions of time and how we can reclaim our time. And then the third session will be focused on relationships with your coworkers and the community. And this focus on those different sections comes from the survey that many of you did to identify what seems to be the bigger sources of strain and stress. And I wanted to put a little note. We will take some time to reflect and write during this webinar. Normally I do this in person and I have people reflect and then talk to your neighbor or small group exercises. And so in this format we can't really do that, but there will be some places where you can reflect. And so if you got the toolkit on Friday, you might have that handy, or just a piece of paper that you can take down some notes. All right. So a little bit on my background. I was trained as a clinical psychologist, and my focus is on adults with severe mental illness. So a lot of my research has been on how do we help people recover a life of meaning in the community when they have illnesses like schizophrenia, major depression. And a lot of my work really focused more on the clinicians and the people providing the care. And how do we help our clinicians do treatments that are based on the best available research? So within the state, the ACT Center that you mentioned at the beginning, we did a lot of training and consultation to mental health agencies all over the state, and hearing from them about their work and their stressors. In mental health work, people go to that career because they want to help others. They want to make a difference. And mental health workers we were seeing were playing a very important role for people who had severe mental illness, and they often had lots of responsibility, but they were often not getting paid very well. They had low autonomy, so they didn't have much say in how their jobs went. And they also had a high pressure for productivity, so they had so many things that they had to do and not enough time to get it done. And there was also this sense that they came to this work to make a difference and to help people, but they're spending all of their time doing paperwork and having all of these stressors, which leads to feeling like this. And so through this work, we started thinking about professional burnout and how can we help people manage those work stressors. And so all of us have our own kind of internal conception of what burnout is. I think for many of us, what comes to mind is this first component of just being overwhelmed and exhausted and drained from your work. And that is one of the key components of burnout. And there are two other aspects of burnout. The second one, and this comes from Christina Maslach's conceptualization. This is the most common or most popular way that we think about burnout and measure it. And the second component she called depersonalization, and that's a sense of feeling separate from others. You become cynical, detached, you have negative attitudes and feelings towards the people you serve or the people you work with. And the third component is really a sense that you're no longer being effective in your job, that you have a reduced sense of accomplishment at work. And so all of these together are what we think of when we talk about burnout. So I'd like you to take a moment and think about that definition of burnout and think about your own standing where you are. And if you have the toolkit, you could turn to page 3. There's a place to write this down. And if not, just on a sheet of paper, where would you say your current level of burnout is? With 1 being no burnout and 100 being extreme. And then think about, what would you like your burnout to be 6 months from now? So when Amber first was talking to me about doing this series, we were talking about compassion fatigue and burnout, and most of my research is on burnout, so I thought it would be helpful to think a little bit about what is compassion fatigue and how does that differ from burnout. And I think a common sense of compassion fatigue is that sense of being exhausted, like that first component of burnout. But when we talk about compassion fatigue in the research world, it's usually associated with clinicians or people working with trauma victims. And so that a lot of this work has been done in the VA and places that deal with people who've been through traumatic stress. And burnout, on the other hand, has really been applied to broader work settings. So burnout is really conceptualized as something that could apply to anyone who does any kind of people work. So not just focusing on people who've been through trauma, but in libraries, in any kind of human service work where you have customers or clients or patrons that you're working with. And compassion fatigue tends to focus on the exhaustion and kind of withdrawal components. When you measure compassion fatigue, it's really around that sense of being drained. And burnout is broader and really thinks about those 3 characteristics together. Being emotionally exhausted, but also being cynical or disconnected and having a reduced sense of personal accomplishment. So our work with burnout, there's been a lot of research that looks at correlates of burnout. We don't know. Some of these may be predictors of, and some of them may be consequences of, because it's correlational research. We can't really say which comes first, but a lot of associated problems arise for the individual who's experiencing burnout. So there have been several studies showing poorer physical health when you have higher levels of burnout. And an example is insomnia, but also flu-like symptoms and other physical health issues. And increased substance use and depression. For the organization where people work, people who have high levels of burnout tend to have reduced commitment to the organization, more dissatisfaction with their job, and more absenteeism and turnover. And there have been a lot of studies in that area really showing that burnout can have a lot of negative impact for the organization. And burnout also can have negative consequences for the people we serve. So a lot of these studies have been done in the healthcare realm, but showing that clinicians who are burned out tend to have patients who have less satisfaction and less quality of care. And there's some idea that there's kind of a cyclical thing, so that if you're feeling burned out and you're cynical and you're kind of negative towards the people you work with, and then they have lower satisfaction and they're less likely to engage positively with you, then it can be more of a cyclical thing as well. And when we think about burnout and what causes burnout, we look to this model, the job demands and resources model of burnout. And on the left, job demands like having a high workload, emotional labor, the sense of always having to have a happy face even when you don't feel so happy, and other things like having conflict at work or conflict within your role. Those are job demands that can increase burnout. And there are job resources that can decrease burnout. So having more clarity in your role, having more autonomy and say over how you spend your day and your time, having developmental opportunities, feedback. And burnout is really seen as kind of a mismatch when your job demands really overwhelm your resources, that kind of leads to burnout. In the middle, in our research, we have really added this idea of personal resources. So in addition to the job resources, each of us bring our own resources and how we can manage our job demands and take advantage of the job resources we have. And so a lot of our work in burnout and our interventions really focus on trying to build up those different areas of resources. So focusing on how people manage their emotions, how we manage our time, how we think about work. Are we getting enough exercise and sleep? Do we have support? And do we have a sense of purpose, that spiritual component of meaning in our work? And all of this is set in an organizational and social context. So each library or system that you work in has a different culture. So the civility component, do people get along well? Are they respectful of each other? Do you feel like you have support for work-life balance? Are there opportunities for health promotion in your organization? And so all of those things also contribute to this model of burnout. And so I thought next, I don't see questions, so I think next we'll kind of shift gears a little bit and look at what the data on librarians in our state say. So we did this survey a few weeks ago and had a great response. We had over 300 people respond, so that was really wonderful to see. I appreciate your time in filling that out for those of you who were involved in that. So hot off the press, I have a graduate student who's working with me on this data, so we don't have a full report yet. She sent this to me last week. In terms of those three components that we talked about for burnout, emotional exhaustion, cynicism, or that depersonalization component, and the personal efficacy at work, the scores at the bottom, you can see 0 means you never experience this, and a 6 is experiencing it every day. So in terms of emotional exhaustion, on average, you all are experiencing emotional exhaustion around a few times a month. You're a little less cynical, but you're feeling pretty effective in your job most of the time. When we look at this compared to mental health samples that we've studied, your group is very similar to the mental health workers that we've looked at. They use a slightly different scale. I think yours was 15 items and theirs was 22. And so it's not exactly the same. But the scales are supposed to measure a similar concept, and they're measured on the same scale from never to every day. So you can see that the library group is pretty similar to mental health workers. In terms of satisfaction and intentions to turnover, many of you are satisfied or very satisfied with your work, averaging 4 out of 5. You're a little less satisfied with your particular job, which is interesting too. So you like the work, but maybe not this particular job as much. But even then, about 2/3 of you were saying you were satisfied or very satisfied. In terms of thinking about leaving the job, about 1/4 of you are reporting that you're thinking about leaving the job maybe once a month or so. And then in terms of predictors of burnout, we started looking at correlates of the different components of burnout. And emotional exhaustion seems to be related in your sample to working more hours, providing more social services, and being a supervisor. So our supervisors in this sample had higher levels of burnout. And our plan is to work more on this report, like develop it into an actual report that we can share back with you as well. So there'll be more to come on that data. And also we'll be doing another survey a few months from now. So I would encourage you to do the follow-up survey too if you get that. All right. So we'll shift now into what we usually do to try to reduce burnout, and our program that we've developed in the mental health system, but have started working with other groups as well. And like any good researcher, we have to start with a good acronym, and so our acronym is BREATHE, which stands for Burnout Reduction, Enhanced Awareness, Tools, Handouts, and Education. And we did a pilot study a few years ago at Midtown Mental Health Center in Indianapolis, and we called it a burnout prevention program, and it was open to all employees, so not just people who provided clinical care. And we did it as a day-long retreat at a hotel off-site conference room. And so it was an 8-hour day, kind of with a lunch break. And then we followed people up 6 weeks later, and we found that they had reduced burnout and more positive attitudes towards their clients. And so based on that pilot study, we wrote a couple of different grant proposals and have gotten funding to study it in more rigorous designs. And so we've looked at the BREATHE intervention in mental health providers and randomized trials that are currently finishing up. And then we've had some studies that we're doing in cancer care and with probation officers and primary care as well. And I think maybe, Amber, that's how you got to us, that you had found some of our research. And so I'm really excited to think about this with you guys. So our conceptual framework is that burnout is really like other stress-related or mental health-related concerns. And then if we can help people become more aware of what burnout is and what it looks like to them, and then learn skills to address it. And we use many of the same approaches that we do in our mental health care. And we also think about not just reducing burnout, but enhancing work as well. And that's important. There was a study on work and health done by the American Psychological Association, and they looked at what the average happiness ratings were in different activities and how much time each of us spend in different activities. And so you can see the things that make us the happiest at the top of the list, we don't tend to spend much time doing those. And if you look at the bottom of the list, the things that had the least happiness score, working was just above commuting to work. But we spend 6.9 hours a day doing that activity. And there have been some estimates that say the average or normal adult working life, we will spend over 90,000 hours working. So it's important that we're not just reducing burnout, but thinking about improving meaning in our work. And so this is a good time for us to reflect just a moment and think about what were the dreams or the passions and the joy that brought you into this work. And so you might, if you have the toolkit, there's a place on page 3 that you might jot down some ideas. But just take a moment to reflect on what it was that brought you into this work. And this would be a time when I would ask you to turn to your neighbor and share something about what brought you into your work. And we don't have that opportunity here, but I was...
They could type it into the chat box.
Oh.
Mm-hmm. Feel free to type in your responses to the chat box if you'd like to share them with the group.
Yeah, that's a great idea. I didn't realize we could do that. Well, I do have something, though, from the survey that you guys did. We did ask about your joy in work, and then I was able to do a little Wordle from that. And so many of you talked about helping patrons, really making a difference, seeing their faces light up when you could match the resource they needed, helping children or other people learn to read and the joy on their face. The books themselves, working with coworkers, developing programs. So a lot of richness that seems to be really important in bringing joy to your work. So when we do this work, we think about burnout as kind of being at the tip of the iceberg. So some people are experiencing burnout. A lot of us are experiencing work stress, which is kind of a broader issue than burnout. We also have life stress underneath that, things that are going on at home that can impact it. But at the base, we really have happiness, well-being, and meaning, and that's the area we want to build up as well, too, having that strong base. And so our approach is really thinking about what are our warning signs when we're starting to feel overwhelmed with our work stress or life stress. What are the triggers or the things that lead you to feeling overwhelmed and burned out? And then what are the practices and ways to approach these things so that you could manage your burnout better and have a greater sense of meaning in your work? And we do that by First, talking about some broader burnout prevention principles, and then we get into some more specific practices and things that you can do. And then throughout that work, people develop their own personal plan or toolkit. And so that PDF file that you have access to, and if you didn't get the email, there is a link where you can download the toolkit. There are some spaces in there where you can think about on your own time outside of these webinars even about how you might be developing your own personal plan. And normally we do this in a workshop setting. We have 6 hours of content and we've done it in various kind of components. So in our work together, we've taken about 3 hours worth of that to do through the webinar here. So starting with identifying the early warning signs, this slide has a lot of the common signs of burnout in the literature that are often associated with feeling burned out. So a lot of physical and emotional signs that you may start feeling depressed or irritable. I know for me, when I'm starting to feel overwhelmed, I wake up at 4:30 in the morning and my mind is going with all of the things I have to get done. And then if I'm not sleeping well, I start feeling irritable, and then that can cause interpersonal issues and being snippy maybe with my family. But also burnout is associated with feeling less satisfied in your work, less commitment, as we mentioned earlier. And so looking at this list, I'd like you to take just a moment and think about what are your personal signs? What is it that seems to happen for you? And if you have the toolkit, there's a place I think on page 4 for you to be able to write down a few of those. And I should say, there may be signs that aren't even on this list that are more personal to you. So for example, for me, I have to remind myself to breathe. And so if you see me walking down the hallway with my arms going up over my head and taking these deep breaths, that's kind of an early sign for me that I need to be slowing down a little bit and focusing more. Okay. And then we also think about what are our triggers or the antecedents. What are the things that lead us to start feeling burned out? And these, again, come from the research showing that the clients we deal with, people who have high service needs, those who are difficult to help, contribute to feeling burned out. I know in the survey, you guys talked about patrons who often had high needs that you felt like you couldn't really address or that were difficult to manage. Job-related factors, work overload. A lot of people talked about having much more work than time. And when we think about burnout being associated with turnover, and then we have staff who leave, and then the rest of us have to make up that work, it becomes an even more of a cycle within an organization. So work overload, ambiguity, conflict. Organizational factors, not having enough support from coworkers, leaders. So think about what are your triggers. And again, there may be personal triggers. For me, I like to be very responsive when people ask me for things, or as a mentor, when my students send me things, I like to get back to them quickly. So when my email inbox is longer than I can see it all on one page, if I have to scroll through my email, then that leads me to feel this sense of dread. So you might have personal triggers like that. And if you have the toolkit, I think page 5. Okay, so having a sense of self-awareness, what are my early signs? What kind of leads me there? Then we can kind of start thinking about how do we approach it? What do we do about it? And we start broad with some general principles about managing work stress, and then get into more specifics in terms of practices and having your own personal plan of what seems to work for you. So at the principle level, we think about managing burnout and work stress is really a personal intention and a choice and a commitment that we have to make. That this is something that's important to us, and we need to spend time on it and make it a central part of what we do. Addressing burnout also requires us to take kind of the inner path and to listen to that still, quiet voice inside. That's kind of a Quaker idea, but that there's an inner source of knowledge that can really help you. We also talk about serving others and not trying to fix others or fix problems. So we can be there to serve our patrons, to serve the library and the community, but not take on that responsibility of fixing everything and trying to give up some of that responsibility. Another important principle is really trusting in the process, that sometimes the things that you do now, you don't even realize what a difference they make in someone else's life until much later. And so you have to kind of trust that what you're doing is okay and that you'll see the benefits later. And really focusing on the present. A lot of us spend a lot of time thinking about the future. Many of us are planners, and I learned a new word last week of precrastination, where you try to plan out everything ahead of time. You're always thinking in the future. Some of us are past-oriented, and we go over in our minds the conversation we had yesterday or how we could have or should have handled something differently. So really focusing on our well-being at work really means taking more of a present-oriented approach and thinking about what are we going to do now? What is happening now? And the last one is really giving yourself permission to care for yourself. And if you do any traveling, they always say on the airlines, when your oxygen mask comes down, you have to put your own mask on first before you can put on the mask and help other people. And that same thing is true of any kind of service work that we do, that we have to have our own source of energy and fulfillment before we can actually help other people. So we need to give ourselves permission to care for ourselves. And sometimes that's hard to do when you go into a field because you want to help others. That can be difficult to let go. So then the practices we use, if you think back to that kind of complicated model, the job demands resources model, in the middle we had personal resources, so how you manage your emotions, how you manage your time. So in our breathe work, we have developed different modules to focus on those different resource areas. And our contemplative practices, we'll start some of those today that are focused more on breathing, mindfulness, imagery type exercises. Then we have some cognitive practices. How do we think about our work? How do we reconnect with those sources of joy and our goals and values that we came to this work for? We do some physical strategies, some yoga exercises that we won't really do in the webinar series, but some of those things. And then just kind of reminding ourselves the importance of sleep and nutrition and those physical strategies. And then we do a lot on time management approaches and That'll be in our second webinar. And then building social support and right relationships. And really thinking about how do we integrate this into our daily work life? Because it's one thing to go to a training and you learn these great things, and then you go back to work and you get busy and you forget about them. So thinking about how do we make these real and ongoing in our daily work. So our plan, I kind of just mentioned this, but we will do the contemplative practices next, and then next week, Monday morning, we'll do a brief refresher practice, kind of a new contemplative exercise, and then we'll spend most of our time integrating the cognitive and time management pieces to think about how we can manage our workload better. And then 2 weeks from now, we'll have our third session. We'll do another contemplative practice to start. And then we'll focus on really connecting with coworkers and the community and dealing with issues around social support and conflict and how we might integrate this with our work and our life. So contemplative practices. These are we call them our cornerstone practices because these are the things that really help us directly address the experience of distress. So when you're starting to feel intense emotions or you're feeling a lot of anxiety or stress, these types of practices can really help those feelings. And they also can help you focus on the present and bring yourself back to the current experience so you can experience more meaningful times at work. And it's much more gratifying when you're focused on the present rather than having your mind in all those different areas. And these are also tools that can help you disengage from work stress and the emotional labor you have during the day of putting on your happy face for the public, and can help you maybe switch off when you leave work. So you might think about times to do these contemplative practices might be at nice transition times when you're starting your work day or leaving your work day. They can be very helpful. And when people do breathing exercises or meditation imagery, there's been a lot of research showing the physiological effects of these kind of practices can really lower your heart rate and your blood pressure. It slows your breathing down. It reduces your muscle tension. So there are a lot of physical effects that you can get from these practices right away. And people who have contemplative practice that they've incorporated on a more regular basis also report an increased sense of life purpose and satisfaction, a greater depth or sense of spirituality and meaning in their lives as well. So these are tools that you could use not only to reduce your distress, but help increase your sense of meaning and overall well-being. So some of the practices we're going to do, and if you have your toolkit, there's a place where you can write down, after we do a couple of these exercises, you can kind of write down what seems to help or work for you. And I am trying to find the page for that. Oh, I don't have it written down. Okay. So I think it's back in here. Okay, on page 7, there's a place that you can write your thoughts and reactions. But this is a section where we're going to do a couple of exercises. And what I'd like you to do, how we think about these, is that some of these exercises may be great for you. Some of them may not fit your style so well. But what we like you to do is to try them out to the extent that you feel comfortable to see if they're going to fit or not. And then when you are working on your own personal plan, identify the things that seem to really resonate with you. And I'm not sure if you are in a quiet place and a private place, but our first exercises, we're going to do some breathing exercises, some deep breathing kind of exercises. And so we'll talk first. I'll kind of talk through the exercise, and then I'll have you practice along with me. But the first one is really to get us into the diaphragmatic breathing, which is a deeper breathing to really bring the air fully into our lungs. And many of us, when we breathe throughout the day, we're breathing more shallow and kind of the upper part of our chest. So for a diaphragmatic breathing, it really helps if you put your hand on your tummy. And when you breathe in, we're going to try to focus on expanding our stomach outward as we're bringing the air in. And then when you breathe out, you're going to focus on pushing, not with your hand, but as you're breathing out, your tummy goes back in and is pressing back towards your spine. So you're really breathing fully in and fully out. So as we do this, if you can get yourself into a comfortable position, and if you feel comfortable and you're in a place where you can do this, you can close your eyes. If you're not comfortable closing your eyes, you can just do a soft focus to kind of relax your eyes. And what I'd like you to do is go ahead and take your deep breath in and hold it for a second. And then breathe all the way out. And keep taking in those deep breaths. And it might be helpful to gently rest your hand on your tummy and focus on making it rise and lower. You'll feel your diaphragm expand as you breathe in and contract as you breathe out. As you breathe in, you might notice the sound your breath is making as you inhale and exhale. You might also notice the temperature. What does the air feel like when you breathe in and breathe out? And if there are thoughts coming into your head, that's okay. You can just notice them and let them go, as if they're leaves floating down the current. So take another deep breath all the way in and all the way out. And when you're ready, you can open your eyes and join us again. So I had a question come up to exhale through your mouth or nose. And I think either is fine. I have seen some people who say breathing in through your nose and exhaling through your mouth is better, but I don't know that there's any science behind that. So
I think it's more of a yoga practice.
A yoga practice. I think your personal practice. I know sometimes I do yoga class on Saturday morning, and I love that, the sound. What's the
Pranayama?
Yeah, the pranayama sound. So you can, whatever's comfortable for you. The main thing is, are you filling your lungs down through into your diaphragm? And are you slowing down and just focusing on your breathing? I think Those are the key things. Another breathing technique is called box breathing, and the Navy SEALs do this as a way of combating their stress. They do some breathing exercises before they go into a combat situation, and then they encourage people to do this box breathing as well. And the idea of it is that when you're breathing, you're imagining a box. And so as you take a breath in, you count to 4 or 5, depending on which web video you're watching. There are some different YouTube videos of Navy SEAL trainers doing this box breathing. But you breathe in for a count, and then you can hold it for the same count, and then breathe out for a count. And you're kind of visualizing going around this box as you breathe in and count to 4 or 5 and then breathe out. So let's take another minute and try the box breathing exercise. And so again, get into a comfortable position. And if you feel comfortable closing your eyes, you can do that. And you want to still take your diaphragmatic breathing, where you're breathing in deeply, maybe even resting your hand on your tummy. And just count in as you breathe in. Count to 4, and then hold it for 4, and then release it for 4. And just take a couple of breaths like that, going around the box, breathing in and counting inside in your head, counting to 4, and then all the way around the box a few times. Okay, and take another deep breath, and then you can come back and join us. The third breathing technique that I have is called the alternate nostril breathing. And this one may be hard to kind of imagine since you can't see me doing it. But this is a technique that can provide a different level of focus. So the first one, the diaphragmatic breathing, some people have a harder time doing that because they have their thoughts come in and it's harder for them to let go. So the box breathing gives you kind of something to focus on. You can focus on counting while you're breathing. The alternate nostril technique is another way of providing a different type of focus. And on this technique, you hold one side of your nose closed as you breathe in. So I usually put my hand up to the side of my nose and breathe in through one side. And then you alternate closing the other nostril and breathe out the other side. And so you breathe in slowly and deeply, and briefly hold it while you change sides on closing the other nostril, and then breathe out. And so you can, we'll get into a comfortable position again, and try taking a couple of deep breaths in, holding one side closed. And then switch sides and breathe out. And then go back to the original side and breathe in again. And switch sides and breathe out. And then stay on that side so that you can switch, so that now you're breathing in from the other nostril. And do that a couple of times, breathing in. And breathing out. Breathing out. Okay, and you might take one more breath and then join us. So with that technique, some people find it kind of silly at first. We had one person who said she did our training, and in the follow-up survey she said that she thought it was silly when we did it. But now she does it, and she can surreptitiously give people the finger while she's doing her breathing exercise. There are different techniques, different levels of focus, and whatever you feel comfortable with, but they give you a different sense of just trying to slow your breathing down and being back in your body and focusing on that. So those are some of the real key core practices. I have one more mindfulness breathing exercise I thought we could do. I'm not sure how this is going to work over the webinar because I have a chime that I'm going to play. And so this is helping us center our focus on something. So while we're breathing, I will play a chime, and I'm going to want you to try to listen to the chime as long as you can hear it. So if you can get back into your comfortable position and close your eyes. And let's take a deep cleansing breath. So your diaphragmatic breathing, where you're breathing in, you might hold it for a second and then breathe out. And keep breathing in deeply. And I'm going to play this chime, and I'd like you to focus on the sound and try to listen to it for as long as you can. Okay, and keep your deep breathing, and I'm going to play the chime again, and I'd like you to try to see if you can follow it even longer. Now I'll play it one more time, and this time focus on the sound and notice if it might connect or resonate in a part of your body. And while your eyes are still closed and you're breathing deeply, notice other sounds in the room around you. You might notice sounds in the same room or outside the room. Take another deep breath or two, and then you can join us again. So that's a mindfulness exercise that helps us just focus on the present, and the chime gives us a place where we can put that energy, and that's something that you can do. You don't need a chime. There's actually a an app on your phone you can download for free that can play that chime. But you can also listen to the birds when you're walking, listen to different sounds around you. And as you slow down your breathing and focus on that, it can bring a sense of peace to you. So there are other contemplative exercises that we will bring in session 2 and 3. So we'll have some more opportunities to learn different strategies there. And then I put a website, the contemplativemind.org, that has a whole tree of these practices. So next time we'll do another contemplative exercise. We'll focus on managing our workload. But I'd like first for each of you to take just 1 minute and pick one thing you'd like to take away from today that you would like to incorporate in your life, and write it down. And in psychology, we talk about SMART goals, and so having something that's specific, measurable, achievable, relevant to you, and something timely, something you can do within this next week. Those are kind of ideal goals as you're writing down your action step. So that is all of my content for today's session, and we can do some questions. And then also, if you want to contact me, I've got my email and our website and phone, and I can send the toolkit if you haven't gotten it yet, or if you want copies of articles I've cited and those kind of things.
Sheila was interested in knowing the name of your chime app.
It's called Chakra Chime, Chakra Chime. And I downloaded it free from probably the Apple. I have an iPhone, so there's also an app for the box breathing that you can download. I haven't downloaded it myself, but I did run across that. And some cool YouTube videos if you want to watch people do different breathing exercises.
Does anybody have any questions for Michelle? So Andrew Smith asked, if you aren't a supervisor, is it a good idea to inform your supervisor that you do these exercises on a daily basis? I think that just if you're planning on doing it on work time, then yes, you will need to get your supervisor's permission ahead of time. But if you're somebody that's allotted break time at your library, or even if you have lunch hours, then it should be more than acceptable to do this sort of thing in the break room.
Mm-hmm.
You might find that other co-workers are even interested in joining you on their breaks. I don't think that there's any harm in even informing your supervisors, because it might be activities that would also be beneficial at your next staff day or any kind of professional development events.
Yeah, that's a great idea. And some of these things are things that you can do just at your desk. So even if you're not closing your eyes, when I start up my computer in the morning, I do the deep breathing, and it kind of slows me down and gets me into a nice place. Or when I park the car before I come in, I do a little self-talk. You've got this, girl, those kind of things, and take a few deep breaths. And so some of these things are things that you can do on a kind of integrate into your daily work routine without taking a lot of time away.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Any other questions?
Well, if there are no more questions, we're going to sign off for the day. Thank you, everybody, for attending. You should be receiving your LEUs as well as a archived recording of this webinar by the end of the week. If you don't receive your LEU, it means that I probably don't have your email address, so you will have to reach out to me just to update me with your current contact information. And thank you all for attending, and we look forward to seeing you next week.
Sounds great. Thanks.